Welcome back, Leominsterites, to the March episode of Representing Leominster. I am your state representative, Natalie Higgins, and I am thrilled to be joined by the state representative from Gardner, Jon Zlotnik, who is the dean of our delegation, despite being, are you still the youngest member of our delegation?
Yes.
So Rep. Jon Zlotnik is in his 11th year in the state legislature and has been a really great mentor of mine as I've gotten started representing Leominster. We're in my 7th year, so it's not new anymore. But really excited to have you on the show just to talk about what's going on in the region. What are you looking forward to in the new session? And as we talk about on the show, kind of how folks can be better advocates about the things that they care about. So can you share a little bit about why you wanted to be state representative in your community, how you ran, and what that path looked like for you?
Sure. So I ran very young, as Natalie alluded to. I had just graduated from UMass Lowell in that spring, and I was already campaigning, and then I won my first election in the fall of 2012, and then I've been reelected every 2 years since then. And the reason that I ran then and the reason that I ran now is mostly unchanged. I think especially our region needs more help and more attention from the state in terms of mostly resources, but also some policy changes. And I think this, this is the best vehicle to enable that change. And
the cities of Leominster, Fitchburg, and Gardner often kind of organize together because we see a lot of the same needs. And a change that happened with the redistricting is you have a new senator. So Senator John Cronin, who is our senator here in Leominster, is no longer the senator in Gardner, but you have Senator Goby, and it adds another voice to the three cities in the North Central region.
It does. Traditionally, we've kind of had two senators. There was always kind of the Tri-City senator, and then there was the rural senator. Now we almost have three because my district is split between Senator Ann Goby and Senator Joe Comerford, whose district is more western, but comes all the way to Winchendon and Ashburnham in my district. And it does. It gives this region a little bit more oomph, especially on the Senate. One of the things that we're always up against is that we're routinely outnumbered by the more populated cities to the east and the more densely populated kind of urban belt around 495 and 128. So every little bit of help we get in terms of amplifying our voice, working together, in the case of redistricting, getting a little bit more Senate coverage, all that helps.
Yeah, and I think one of the cool things about our delegation, we've been tight because we have to be, right? Like to be better advocates for the region and really make sure resources are coming out to North Central Mass. But we also have the tripartisan delegation claim to fame. Yep. So when we can speak with one voice from Democrats, Republicans, and our only unenrolled member of the legislature, Susanna Wibbs, I do think that gives us a little more power in terms of speaking in a unified manner.
Yeah, and that's been the case. There's obviously been several reps who've come and gone in my time, several senators too, and that's been the case. We've always been able to work as a group across party lines. The distinction of being the only tripartisan delegation in the state. Everyone's been able to kind of work through political differences at times and make sure that we're really trying to, again, because of what we're up against politically with the dynamics of power in the state, making sure that our region is speaking with one voice as often as possible.
Yeah, and one of the cool things is a lot of the organizations serving our communities work very much across the region, and one of the ways you and I have gotten to collaborate is with Growing Places and Ann Yeagle and her team, because they're doing some really tremendous work in your region, piloting some new things in Winchendon, and then our hope is to kind of spread that across the rest of their coverage area.
Yeah, so we kind of were able to put together a couple of things. Really, this came out of COVID somewhat, that different groups, including Growing Places, started to do more in creatively trying to solve the food security issue in this region. We have several food deserts. Winchendon, for example, lost their grocery store several years ago, and we still have not been able to really adequately replace that. But organizations like Growing Places are stepping up to try and provide real substantive nutritional planning across the board. And like you mentioned, Growing Places through another initiative called Project Heal has been working in Winchendon for a number of years. We're trying to expand that project into Gardner and also paralleling another new initiative from Growing Places that will be based in Gardner, but will serve the whole region to provide food processing services and kind of like little meal kits, utilizing some of the great local produce, meat, dairy, poultry that's native to the area to try and maximize that benefit again, for the whole region.
Yeah, we just had one of our senior coffee hours, and one of the attendees was showing me the meals he's been creating with the fresh produce that he's gotten from growing places, and just how much easier it is because it comes straight to his door.
Yeah, and it's a great way to utilize that resource we have in this area. One of the programs we were able to tap into during COVID, because the federal government was obviously putting a lot of money in different places, but one thing they were doing was this called Farmers to Families Food Box Program. And what that was doing was it was buying in bulk, produce and different meat, and poultry, dairy products from across the region, putting them into boxes, and then giving them out to folks. And the reason they were doing that was because obviously with COVID, supply and demand had shifted a lot. Big institutions, restaurants weren't open, but this food was still being produced and people still needed it. So through these federal programs, they were able to kind of put one and one together. And this is kind of an offshoot of that, trying to continue on the success and the popularity of those programs to continue to pull together some of those same resources.
Yeah, and Ann Eagle and Growing Places have been on the show before talking about the Healthy Incentive Program and some of the challenges that North Central Mass has while we grow most of the fresh produce for the state. It doesn't stay here. And how can they leverage those connections to make sure that more of that healthy, fresh food is coming to our residents and getting connected?
Right, and especially, the HIP program is an important piece of that. Not only is it good for people's nutrition, but it's also good for our local economy too. It keeps more of those dollars local and really helps out our food producers and farmers and things like that are an important part of our local economy.
So you talked a little bit about how COVID presented some opportunities. Are there other things in terms of the legislative process that you're looking forward to coming out of COVID, or things that are happening in your district that are ways that Gardner and the surrounding towns kind of are pivoting?
Well, I think one thing that COVID really forced us to do is it forced us to look at a lot of our systems, some of which had been unchanged and neglected and resistant to change for a long time. And I think you can piece through, now that we've kind of gone through several rounds of these changes, some of the positives that have come out of that. One of the things I think for our constituents is that now, starting this session, you're going to be able to participate in legislative hearings from the comfort of your home. That was always a challenge my constituents had, upwards of a 2-hour drive to get to the State House if you don't hit traffic. And then parking in Boston isn't cheap. Nothing in Boston is cheap. And it really inhibited a lot of people from participating in that very important part of the process. But one of the things we did in our rules this year was mandate that all these hearings going forward are hybrid, so that people can participate remotely. And that's something that I don't think would have happened had it not been for COVID forcing everything first online, making us make those adaptations, invest in that equipment and in those systems, but now utilizing that to make sure that people have that option. In the same vein, making sure that municipalities have that same flexibility. One of the things that we're considering right now, and actually the House and Senate have voted on, is extending some of the remote meeting structure that was put in place during COVID for municipalities. The vote we took was to extend it to 2025. Hopefully that happens, because I think a lot of municipalities have been able to, one, be a lot more efficient in how they do business, but also enable people to be brought into the process a lot easier.
And we realized, I think, with the pandemic, that for especially the smaller communities, we have the benefit of often working with cities, but the smaller communities can't do the hybrid meeting very well. You can kind of do fully remote or fully in person, and the technology doesn't necessarily exist. And we forget, when we had the remote meetings in the pandemic, we still had to do them by phone. Folks thought we would be on a Zoom room or something like that and participating that way. A lot of our colleagues still don't have access to reliable broadband and couldn't join via an internet connection. So in order to make sure that all of our colleagues were participating, and that all of these local meetings are able to actually meet the needs of their constituencies with the technology that's available and accessible to them, it looks different.
And it is amazing how creative things have gotten and how inventive this space has become. Obviously, we're sitting in what is a very nice studio for this space. But that changes obviously town to town. I represent obviously the city of Gardner, but also the towns of Ashburnham, Winchendon, and Templeton, which are smaller, have smaller budgets, less resources, and in just a short amount of time, the way that they partnering with different private tech companies have been able to adapt. I don't know if you've come across this device yet, but the OWL camera.
I have seen an OWL camera, and I've seen it work and not work.
Yes, there's some kinks to be worked out, but. For instance, the City Council chamber in Gardner, I think has upwards of 6 cameras that can be, and it's controlled by 2 staff people during meetings, to cover the meeting for recording purposes and broadcast purposes. A town, like a town of Winchendon, population of just over 10,000, smaller budget, doesn't have those kind of resources. The OWL camera gives them that opportunity to still have that available. To enhance transparency, enhance public participation, basically just because there's this new piece of tech that wouldn't have existed had it not been for us having to be, thrown into the deep end, so to speak, trying to keep these meetings and these processes going through COVID.
Yeah. Shifting, looking forward a little bit, what legislation are you excited to be working on this session? Is there anything that Leominster voters might be interested in?
I mean, I think this affects the entire region. But it's infrastructure across the board. We obviously did the big infrastructure bill last session. A lot of our time, I think, this year is going to be implementing that and making sure those dollars get to where they're needed. But across my district, we have probably half a dozen major multi-million-dollar infrastructure needs that are in some cases decades past their due date. We're working on one project in Winchendon right now where it's replacing a water main where on a good day, 50% of the water moving through it leaks into the ground, which is bad for a ton of reasons, not least of which it stretches an already tight water budget in that town. But then we have a lot of really old pieces to our water, sewer infrastructure out here. A few years ago, there was a valve that blew in Gardner that caused a major water main break. That valve was installed and buried underground when Ulysses Grant was president. So we've been on borrowed time with a lot of this stuff for a while, and it's so critical because when you talk about large economic development projects or big developments, often the first domino to fall is making sure that there's sewer and water capacity. And in some cases, our systems just really are so old and in need of such repair that you can't even have the conversation about whether or not that's possible. And really, it takes, really takes state resources to be able to do that.
Yeah. For folks who aren't familiar, the estimate just to get our roads and our bridges and our public transportation system up to a state of good repair, right? Like just not broken. It's $50 billion, and they're anticipating that we need to invest $2.5 billion every year over the next 20 years to get there, right? Like this isn't something that we're going to be able to do overnight. We don't necessarily have the capacity funding-wise, but also worker-wise, right? Like the work infrastructure to actually do these roads and bridges projects. We have to be thoughtful about it. And my hope is with the new fair share revenue coming in that there's going to be a real conversation of how do we spread this across the Commonwealth, not just east of 495. And that is something that Rep. Zlotnik and I are going to be talking a lot about with the delegation of how do we make sure that we're getting resources and doing some of those lower dollar interlinkages. So how does the MART, our public transit system, connect with the WRTA, the Worcester transit system? They don't interlink really well, and it can be really hard for someone who has a doctor's appointment in Worcester to be able to get there on public transit.
Yeah, and obviously transportation is a huge issue in this part of the state. Your district, obviously, I'm envious of the compactness of your district, but my district, you can't get anywhere without a car. We are also part of the MART system, but that's stretched very thin, and just the nature of how sparsely populated some parts of my district are, public transportation is a big challenge. But like you said, it's critical. People need to get to where they need to go, where they need to work, their appointments, various things, just basic quality of life issues.
Yeah. Some of the other issues you work on, I know that I co-sponsor, are around credit unions. You also have a lot around pub brewers, which you have a growing number of them in your district. Can you talk a little bit about credit unions and like what changes need to happen there?
Yeah, so it's kind of this little bit of a carve out for the way municipalities do banking. Municipalities, just like everybody else, they need a bank. They need to deposit. They need to deposit funds. They need to be able to withdraw funds, just like any business or any individual. However, and there's several reasons for this. In part because some of these statutes predate the existence of credit unions, but municipalities cannot currently really do business with credit unions. And what that does is for municipalities, it means there's less competition for those accounts. And ultimately what that means is that they're getting less return, because even if if a municipality is routinely depositing millions of dollars, even on the short term, a very small change in that interest rate can mean good money for a small community. And I always think about it in terms of this, like if something like this could change my district's budget by even $100,000, well, that's a little bit more road we get to pave, or another teacher we can hire, or we can replace outdated firefighting apparatus sooner. All those types of things. All those little dollars matter to our municipalities, and that's just a small fix that we could make to give them that option.
And a recurring theme about the Massachusetts legislative process is that so much of our legislation is decades, if not centuries old. One of those places is around our alcohol laws.
Yeah.
And it really has impacted the growing microbrewery scene, which has been a huge growth in Massachusetts in terms of innovation in smaller businesses. But the way that we handle alcohol in Massachusetts envisions kind of a few really big beer makers.
Right. I mean, because the structure that's put in place for alcoholic beverages was put in place at the end of Prohibition, and so it was based on what the conditions were at that point and right before Prohibition, and especially in the last few decades, that industry, consumer trends have changed so drastically. And our laws really haven't kept pace with a lot of those changes. So you're seeing a lot of friction between different sectors of the industry and consumers and the industry. We've been successful in trying to change some things. And I think part of the reason that we do this, one, is because I think it makes sense. But two, I think there is a real economic value to these businesses. And I think it also just gives people more consumer choice, more opportunities. One of the things that we were able to do years ago was change the laws around what are usually commonly referred to as beer gardens or tap rooms, things like that. One of the first ones in the state ended up being the Wachusett Brew Yard in Westminster, which now they have a couple locations. But that was a relatively recent change that we were able to make through a budget amendment to allow those small brewers to have that as an opportunity, and the years since, it's really, it's exploded economically speaking, and there's been, across the state, these things are booming. I now have a third one on the way in my district, but Central Mass is home to a lot of these. It takes advantage of, our sort of natural beauty and the locations of these types of things. Also around the access to local, local farms. So it's really gone hand in glove. And, if you look across the state, it's many tens of millions of dollars in investments, hundreds of jobs created out of this simple change. And the next thing that's on our list to address is pub brewers. Pub brewers are a really niche part of the alcoholic beverage industry. At any given time, there's between 25 and 35 licensed operators in Massachusetts. And these are, in my district, it's the Gardner Ale House or Boston Beer Works, places that, brew their product on site at the pub location paired with a restaurant. It's like I said, it's a really small segment of the population in terms of this industry. But one thing that they're not allowed to do, that all other brewers are allowed to do, is self-distribute. If you're Miller Coors or you're Wachusett Brewing, you have the option of either partnering with a distributor or distributing yourself, buying a truck, buying a van, And obviously there's a ton of regulation around this, but you can self-distribute your products. Farmer brewers can do this, another small brewer, and again, all the way up to the big commercial brewers, but pub brewers are specifically excluded from having this opportunity, and it really stifles their growth, because most brewers will start out self-distributing their products, and then over time as they grow and have the volume, then it makes sense to partner with a large distributor. So we've been working on this in partnership with the Brewers Guild of Massachusetts. We're hoping that this session will be able to move that a little bit further down the field.
Yeah, I think it's been really fascinating for me to realize how much that industry has grown with, despite the regulations really anticipating you're going to only exist as one kind of entity, and there isn't a licensure process where you could grow with it. And we've got to fix it and figure out how do we bolster all of this innovation.
And it's a big part of our economy. I think it's a big area that we could grow. Obviously, tourism is rebounding, and tourism has long been a big part of Massachusetts' economy, especially in North Central Mass. Yeah. We get a lot of agricultural tourism, natural tourism, all that kind of stuff.
Now with the Devon Studios, we have a lot of tourism around the movie
around the productions. Yep, and these again kind of pair very nicely with that. Again, you could look across the state and find many examples of kind of these popping up in scenic locations that have done very well. But again, they're kind of hampered by some of the antiquated statutes we still have.
Yeah. So one of the questions I ask most of my guests is, if someone is interested in a particular issue and they want to, get more involved and they want to advocate and they want to create change, what advice do you have for someone who's trying to change something that they see that could be better in their community?
Just reach out to us. We always talk about this, that we're only as good as the stories people tell us, and none of us are experts on everything. For instance, just yesterday, I met with a group of constituents who were bringing an issue around swimming in state-owned ponds to my attention. That I candidly told them, I said, I had never heard of this before. I did not know this was an issue. And now we're going to start working on that and hopefully come to a resolution with the state. But that's the way it happens, because if our viewpoint and our sort of the extent of what we can work through on any given day is somewhat limited. We're just one person. But if people bring us issues to our attention and candidly are a little patient with us and help educate us on the issue, that's the best way to go about it.
And so Rep. Zlotnik mentioned the ability for Leominster residents to testify in support of legislation. Personal stories are some of the best tools to moving legislation forward. There are more than 6,000 bills filed every session, and a lot of them are really good ideas. But we have to create a sense of urgency so that we can get them to the finish line, and your stories have been the really most powerful tool that we have. And so if you're interested in a particular issue, so many of you have reached out to me asking me to co-sponsor legislation that you care about. But if you want to get more involved with the process, you want to attend a hearing, you want to watch it, you want to participate and share your story, please reach out, because we're happy to help. And we've even worked with constituents on successful legislation that has made it through the House with an idea based on an experience that they had and a way that they thought they could make the system work better. So please reach out. You can always give us a call at 978-227-5278, our Leominster office. We still host our office hours Monday nights and Friday mornings by appointment, so reach out if you want to schedule one. And I'm just so thankful to Rep. Zlotnik for joining us on this March episode and sharing a little bit of what's going on in your district.
Yeah, very happy to be back.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month.